In this video, we continue with our look into the FlyByWire A32nx. This time we cover the flight control unit, which deals with the autopilot. That's coming up next. Hello sim pilots and welcome back to another Microsoft Flight Simulator video. In this tutorial we're going to go over the A32nx flight control unit, also known as the FCU. The A320 Autopilot has two types of modes to guide and control the aircraft. The first one is managed mode and is controlled by the flight management guidance computer, and the second one is selected mode and that is controlled by the inputs done by the pilot. If we have a look at the FCU, in managed mode you will see 3 dashes and a dot. In selected mode you will see the value selected by the pilot, except for the altitude window, which always shows the altitude. If it's in managed mode it will have a dot next to the altitude. If it's in selected mode it will not have the dot next to the altitude. So before we take off and demonstrate the autopilot, let's have a look at the unit and all of its buttons and knobs. So starting on the left hand side here, you can see we have the speed Mach button, which changes the display for the speed between speed in knots and its Mach number. The first round dial we have is to control the speed window. If we put our mouse over it and we click left, it will decrease the speed, and right it will increase the speed, both using your left mouse button. Just the arrows will change left and right. You can also use your middle mouse wheel. By scrolling the mouse wheel up it will increase the speed, and scrolling the mouse wheel down will decrease the speed. To change the units between selected and managed mode, we push or pull the knobs. So to push you have the up arrow, and to pull you have the down arrow. So push for managed mode and pull for selected mode. Same thing with the second rotary knob, increase, decrease the heading, push for managed and pull for selected. Here we have the localizer button to arm or disarm the localizer. Here we have our heading, vertical speed and track FPA button, our autopilot 1 and 2 buttons, and our auto throttle button. The next rotary is for your altitude. So again, increase, decrease left, increase right, and you can switch between 100s and 1000s. Over here we have our expedite button to expedite your climb and descend. Over here you have your metric altitude button, so you can have the altitude displayed in metric units. And over here you have your vertical speed knob, or push to level off. Here you have your approach button to arm the approach. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put everything in managed mode. We're going to do a takeoff and a short flight to Heathrow, where we'll demonstrate the functions of the autopilot. So let's do that now. Going to release the parking brake. Increase throttle 40%, let the engine spool up. Set toga. The airspeed is live. There's 80 knots. 100 knots. V1 rotates. The positive rate of climb, gear up. I'm going to immediately activate the autopilot by pressing the autopilot 1 button. At 1,500 feet above the ground, it's going to command climb thrust. There, lever climb, so we're going to pull the throttle back to the climb detent. There's change to thrust climb. So it's going to continue increasing speed. Once we get to the S speed, we can set flaps to 0 and then managed speed will automatically accelerate the aircraft up to 250 knots because we are still below 10,000 feet. There is an altitude restriction of 5,000 feet on this departure that we are on. So we'll demonstrate that. There is 200 knots, so I'm going to flaps up, disarm the speed brakes, going to turn off the runway turn off lights and the nose wheel lights. There's a green dot speed. As you can see, the aircraft is accelerating up to 250 knots. There, the speed has been captured. Alt star is going to level off at 5,000 feet, as that is our altitude restriction for this departure. It is also the altitude we've set in the FCU. There we've leveled off at 5,000 feet. So what we can do for this demonstration is we can increase the altitude window, then we can push for managed mode. So push, and the aircraft, you see the dot for managed, the aircraft will continue its climb up to 19,000 feet that we have selected in the altitude window. There we can set standard on the barrow. As you can see, we're about to come up through 10,000 feet, and what will happen is the aircraft will decrease its pitch in order to, there it pitches nose down in order to increase the speed. Now that we are reaching managed speed, the climb rate will increase once again to continue to our selected flight level of 190. Now that we're above 10,000 feet, we can turn off the landing lights and turn off the seatbelt signs. And we're still in managed mode with the heading as well, so it's following the route set in the flight management guidance computer. Okay, so what we can do now is we can play with autopilot. So if I decrease the altitude window to say 15,000 feet, the aircraft will level off at 15,000 feet, and it won't go any higher than that because that's the speed selected in the altitude window. So there, alt star is captured, and it'll begin decreasing its climb rate in order to capture 15,000 feet. So if we start here with our speed, we can manage the speed by rotating the dial to the right to increase it and to the left to decrease it. So let's say we wanted to increase our speed to 300 knots. We'd rotate to 300 and we'd pull in order to take control of the speed. And as you can see here, the aircraft will increase speed back up to 300 knots. If I wanted to go back into managed speed, I would simply push the knob back in and it would go back to managed speed, and the speed would decrease back to 290 knots, which is the managed speed at the moment. If we need to change heading, we can simply turn the heading dial left or right to change heading left or right. So let's say we want to turn left to heading of 140. We would turn to 140 and we would pull for selected heading, and as you can see, the aircraft will turn to the selected heading of 140. You can also change the heading to track. If you wanted to fly track, you could change it. Let's say we wanted to fly a track of 150. The heading would turn to a track of 150. Remember, heading is where the nose is pointing. Track is your path over the ground. So depending on the winds, the heading and the track could be the same if you have a headwind or a tailwind, but if you have a crosswind, the heading and the track would be slightly different. Let's put it back in heading mode. And if you want to go back to manage mode, you'd simply push the knob in and it'll go back to manage mode, and then it'll go back to following your flight plan over there. Same with the altitude window. If you wanted to decrease or increase the altitude, you could change it like this. So at the moment we're flying on a selected altitude, so if I wanted to continue the climb or the descent, I would simply turn the dial to the altitude selected and I would push for the selected altitude. Over here, your metric altitude button, if you push this button here, it shows your altitude in meters. So as you can see there in the bottom, showing 4,300 descending. So for the approach, what I've done is I've inserted the ILS into 09 right, and what we can do is we can use the autopilot in either managed mode or selected mode to fly this approach. So we will use both for this demonstration. So we need to decrease speed to 220 knots using selected mode. I'm going to decrease and I'm going to push for selected mode. So decrease speed down to 220, and we need to descend down to 7,000 feet. So again, push for selected, thrust idle, open descent, see speeds coming back, and we're going to start the descent down to 7,000 feet. So what we're doing now is we're using a combination of selected and managed. Selected for the speed and the altitude, and managed for the heading using nav mode. It's following the flight plan. Let's say, for example, you were flying on VATSIM and they were giving you heading and altitude to fly, then you would change the heading to the assigned heading that ATC gives you, as well as the speed restrictions that ATC may give you. So for now, we'll continue following the flight plan as we descend and we slow down to 220 knots. So we're very low rates of descent due to the fact that we need to slow down. If I increase speed to 240, you'll see the rates of descent will increase because we're already at speed 240. So then I can decrease the speed, and you can play with the speed to change the rates of descent. So we'll continue descending and slowing down to 220 knots by Bravo November. Okay, coming up through 10,000 feet, we can turn on the landing lights, turn on the fasten seatbelt signs, and also turn on the landing system. Now let's say, for example, ATC didn't want you to fly this entire approach. They could vector you to finals. So let's say ATC gives you a call, says Speedbird 123, turn right heading 170, for example. Then you would go to your heading knob, you would scroll to 170, and then you would push down for selected 170, and then the aircraft will turn to that heading of 170. Obviously, if you want to fly the entire approach, you could just do it on managed mode. But if you fly in VATSIM, for example, this would be very common during arrivals, depending on the traffic load. And then perhaps he would give you further instruction, turn right again, heading 200. You would continue the turn just by scrolling through and changing the heading to 200. So now you're on selected mode. Whatever heading you select on the rotary here is the heading that's going to fly. So we're coming up to 7,000 feet. Maybe he says Speedbird 123, descend, maintain 3,500 feet. Then you could scroll down, you could change this to hundreds, 35, and pull for selected, and it would continue the descent. So now that we're getting close to arrival, we can activate the approach in the MCDU. Activate approach phase, confirm, yes. Now with the approach phase activated, if you go back to manage speed, the speed will slow down as you put out the flaps. You can see the glide slopes coming in, the localizers coming in. We're very high still, we're still quite far out, 18 miles out. So this would be a vectored approach to final. So maybe you get another radio call, Speedbird 123, continue descent 3,000 feet. and you would continue the descent down to 3,000 feet. Maybe you get a speed restriction, you've got traffic in front of you, you would say speedbird 123, speed 210 knots, then you could decrease the speed to 210 knots. And so you're controlling the speed, the heading and the altitude all in selected mode. There we've got the cloud slope coming back to us. Maybe it gives us another vector, turn left heading 180. You can turn left heading 180. And the runway is down there to our left. So maybe it gives us a final vector saying turn left heading 140. Turn left heading 140. Cleared for the ILS approach 09 right. Then we can turn left heading 140, and at this time we can actually activate the approach. And what it's done is it's gone back into managed mode, and now the autopilot will capture the localizer and the glide slope. And there you can see the aircraft turning on its own to capture the localizer, and it'll capture the glide slope as well. So there it's turning to line up with runway 09 right. There the glide slope has been captured, so it'll descend now and stay on the glide slope. All done on the autopilot. So what we can do, glide slope captured, localizer captured. We've got flaps 1 set. So we can begin slowing down, set flaps 2, and we can actually go back to manage speed. The aircraft will descend accordingly. We turn on the landing lights, ding the cabin, the landing gear down. Select flaps 3. Set flaps full. There's our approach speed, 1,000 feet to go. Disconnect the autopilot here and we will land manually.
Minimum.
I don't know why that auto land is flashing there, that's not correct.
50, 40, 30, 20, retard.
Thrust to idle, flare, line up with the runway. And we are done. Reverse is out. Manual braking. And we will exit here on the left. So there you have it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial on the autopilot. If you guys have any questions for me, leave them below and I will get back to you. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing for the next one, and we will see you in the skies. Thanks for watching.